Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us. I'm here today with the Minister of Justice, Mickey Amery, as well as our Minister of Environment, Schulz, as well as our Minister of Affordability and Utilities, Nathan Neudorf, in order to talk about our next steps that our government will take to combat the federal government and their net zero electricity regs and the threats that they pose to the livelihoods of Albertans. According to the Alberta Electric System Operator's own analysis, these regulations set an emission limit that is completely unattainable and would make Alberta's electricity system even more expensive, more than 100 times less reliable than the province's supply adequacy standard. In fact, these regulations have caused so much uncertainty and set such absurd timelines that they've killed any hope of private industry bringing on any new, clean and reliable, unabated natural gas power generation. Alberta currently relies on natural gas for 75% of its power generation. Without adequate natural gas, our province would be at serious risk of regular brownouts and blackouts during the cold dead of winter through the dog days of summer. But these regulations do not just threaten the reliability of Alberta's electrical grid, they also jeopardize its affordability. Costs would increase by $30 billion, raising electricity prices by 35% for hardworking Albertans. For Alberta families, that means that they would have to pay hundreds of dollars more on their electricity bill each year. That money out of their budget to pay for groceries, to fill up their tank, to drive their kids to hockey practice, or even pay the fees for their kids to play the sports that they love to play. For Alberta businesses, this would mean thousands of dollars more in electricity costs. That's less money to pay for their employees, cover their expenses, and grow their business. But the costs of an unreliable power grid are even more grim. If Ottawa had its way, Albertans would be left to freeze in the dark. In the depths of a minus 40-degree winter cold snap, families would be bundled up in their winter coats while sitting down for dinner, a dinner lit by flashlight or candle as they wait for the rolling blackouts to move on to the next community. There would be no street lights working to light up your way home through the blinding blizzard as you squint to see the dimly lit brake lights of the car ahead of you. In the heat of summer, you would be left worrying if the groceries left in your fridge and freezer will spoil before the blackouts end. And hospitals would be overwhelmed by the influx of patients suffering from heat stroke while trusting that their generators keep the lights on for their life-saving equipment. And if you don't believe me, just look at what happened in Spain and Portugal just a few days ago. Protecting the reliability and affordability of our electricity is of utmost concern for our government because this is about protecting the lives and livelihoods of Albertans. And what did the feds tell us, Alberta, when we tried voicing our very real and serious concerns about these regulations? They told us, too bad, we're going to do it anyway. In fact, they refused to work with Alberta or listen to Canadians while developing their net zero electricity regulations. Do they really expect us to just freeze in the dark? Sadly, such uncaring arrogance is typical of this Liberal government. And that is why last November we introduced the first Alberta Sovereignty Within a United Canada Act resolution so that our province could take strong and effective action against these destructive regulations. And today, we are taking another step to protect Albertans' livelihoods by challenging the constitutionality of the net zero electricity regulations in the Court of Appeal of Alberta, and we look forward to making our case. Alberta will no longer tolerate having our livelihoods threatened, our industries targeted, and our resources landlocked by Ottawa. We will not accept their reckless and dangerous policies that will harm our economy, stifle our energy industry, jeopardize the reliability of our electricity grid, and raise electricity prices for Albertans. Prime Minister Mark Carney must immediately commence working with our government to reset the relationship between Ottawa and Alberta with meaningful action rather than hollow rhetoric. We will not sit by quietly. Albertans expect to be treated with fairness and respect, just like any other province in this country. Our government will not blindly accept unconstitutional net zero regulations that put Albertans in harm's way. We will always stand up and fight for our province, and we will not let Albertans freeze in the dark. And with that, I would like to invite Minister Mickey Amery to speak more to this issue.
Well, thank you very much, Premier, and good morning to all of you. As the Premier has already advised, Alberta is referring a question on the constitutionality of the federal government's clean electricity regulations to the Court of Appeal of Alberta. The federal clean electricity regulations were introduced in 2024 and impose strict carbon limits on fossil fuel power in an attempt to force a net zero grid by 2035. This is an unachievable target given the current technology and infrastructure. The reliance on unproven technologies makes it nearly impossible to operate natural gas plants without costly upgrades, threatening investment, grid reliability, and Alberta's energy security. As the Premier has stated and said time and time again, these targets are just not realistic for Alberta, and they intrude deeply into areas of exclusive provincial jurisdiction, with real consequences for electricity prices, reliability, and Alberta's economy. Canada's constitution is absolutely clear. The provinces have exclusive jurisdiction over the development, conservation, and management of sites for the generation and production of electrical energy. The clean electricity regulations fail to acknowledge the unique characteristics of Alberta, Alberta's climate, its economy, and the electrical power system. It is clear that the federal government's new regulations are not actually about reducing emissions. Instead, just like with the ill-conceived carbon tax, families, businesses, and the province will be punished. The courts have agreed with us on similar questions of federal overreach, and we are confident that they will agree with us in this. The federal clean electricity regulations seek to regulate in an area of exclusive provincial jurisdiction and are therefore unconstitutional. We are prepared to fight the clean electricity regulations to defend Alberta against the risks that they represent. I'll now turn it over to Minister Schulz, who will talk more about Alberta's proactive approach to reducing carbon emissions. Thank you.
Well, thank you, everyone. Premier and Minister, good morning. As Alberta has said all along, the so-called federal clean electricity regulations won't reduce emissions, but will increase punishing costs on families and businesses and can lead to supply shortages at the worst possible time for people across our province. We submitted our thoughtful and detailed analysis, as did other provinces, all arguing that these regulations simply do not work, would risk the affordability and reliability of our electricity grids and, of course, public safety for all Albertans. But Ottawa didn't listen. Industry groups, businesses, and regular Canadians from coast to coast told the federal government that these regulations were reckless, that they would drive up costs, that they would kill jobs. Again, Ottawa didn't listen. Then we launched the Tell the Feds campaign. We illustrated the power going out on regular, everyday Albertans, leaving families wondering, is it that we can't afford to pay our bills anymore because of these federal Liberal policies, or is it that there isn't enough power in the grid because of these policies? And still, Ottawa refused to listen. Instead, they favoured an eco-radical activism agenda over good policy that actually benefits the environment and the economy. This is about an agenda of shutting in and shutting down production, and as you've heard, it will leave Albertans in the dark. We can't risk putting families at risk from safety and affordability impacts at a time like this. I am honoured to be working alongside the Premier and my colleagues to protect Alberta's economy and consumers, and to refer the constitutionality of these regulations to the Court of Appeal. We won't accept these clean electricity regulations as written. It's non-negotiable. We can't. We are absolutely leaders in environmental stewardship, reducing emissions while growing production, and we can continue to protect our environment and the reliability of our grid in a much more realistic way that doesn't jeopardize jobs, our economy, or the livelihoods and lives of Albertans. And with that, I'll hand it over to Minister Neudorf.
Thank you, Minister Schulz. Minister Amery, Premier, I'll keep this brief. Our job is to always put Albertans and their well-being first. What the federal government's clean electricity regulations is doing is putting ideology first, and we cannot allow that to stand. Electricity is not a luxury. Albertans increasingly depend on electricity to provide for their families, to put food on the table, power their businesses, and chase a better future. But Ottawa's clean electricity regulations treat electricity like it's a luxury by putting the affordability and reliability of our grid at risk. They will create barriers for our world-class energy industry that literally powers our economy and Albertans' success. These regulations would be disastrous for affordability, increasing power prices by 35%, while making our grid 100 times less reliable at a time when Albertans and Canadians are relying on power more than ever. Ottawa needs to understand the intermittent nature of renewables and why natural gas is so crucial to ensuring that we have reliable, dispatchable baseload power in our northern climate. Ottawa needs to understand the human cost and the real harm that they will inflict through these regulations. I'm proud of a government that is taking a step to protect Albertans from dangerous federal overreach. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody. We'll now go into our Q&A. We'll be taking one question, one follow-up. We'll start off with questions here in the room before making our way to the phones. Of course, raise of hands, thank you. We'll start off with Julia, then we'll go to Shay.
Hi, this is a question for the Premier, Julia Wong, CBC National. There was a letter sent to yourself and one also sent to the Prime Minister from the Chief of Sturgeon Lake Cree Nation and the Chief of the Mikisew Cree First Nation. They say that you're attempting to manufacture a national unity crisis by enabling a referendum on separatism. My question to you is, what will your government do to ensure any referendums respect and do not breach Treaties 6, 7, and 8?
Well, first let me say that we respect all of the treaty rights that are enshrined in the Constitution under Section 35. And the Citizen Initiative Act is not new legislation, and it was never designed to, nor does it breach treaty agreements. The Citizen Initiative Act, I think, is the purest form of democracy we have, and it gives all Albertans an opportunity to play a direct role in the democratic process by inviting them to have a direct say on issues their fellow citizens want to put to the people. Any Albertan can put an idea forward on any topic, and if they're able to get the number of signatures, then it would go to a vote, and that includes a vote of members of First Nations, and we encourage Indigenous peoples to participate in the process.
My follow-up is, and I know that you said that you want a sovereign Alberta within a united Canada, and I see that you're saying that this would be the purest form of democracy, but you've also lowered the threshold for any referendum to happen, which we know will very much probably include a referendum on Alberta separatism. Are you risking the province's relationship with Indigenous people to appease a vocal minority who want to separate from Canada?
The changes that are proposed in the Elections Act, I had put in the minister's mandate letter when I first signed off on it in 2023. And it was in looking at the way in which propositions are put forward around the world, in particular California, which seems to have the most successful opportunity for citizens to engage in the process. They have anywhere from 5 to 10 propositions every year, but their measures are actually quite a bit lower than ours. It's 5% for a statutory change based on the previous level of vote for the governor, and 8% for constitutional changes. So actually ours is still higher than what we see in other jurisdictions. It needs to be high, but it also needs to be achievable, and that's what we're trying to achieve with this balance.
Sorry, I just feel like I'm not getting an answer, though, on whether this could be a risk in terms of the province's relationships with Indigenous people.
Well, I'm not going to prejudge what citizens are going to do for a petition. Once there's a petition on the table and there's an active discussion from citizens having achieved the requisite number of signatures, I'd be happy to answer your question. Right now, this is just enabling legislation so that any citizen is able to go out, garner signatures, and if they're successful, then I guess you can ask me to comment on what is actually on the table. You're putting forward a hypothetical that doesn't exist.
Thank you. We'll go to Shane.
Yeah, just further to that, asking you to speak directly to those First Nations leaders. There's some strong language in here calling your statements and actions irresponsible and demanding you step down from your conduct immediately. What is your response directly to them, and how would you characterize, I guess, your perception of your relationship with them when they're seeming quite frustrated?
Well, I can see that the media is trying to describe this legislation as something it's not. It's a citizen initiative change that any petition can come forward. I gave some examples in the legislature yesterday. In California, which is a very left-wing jurisdiction, they have brought forward petitions on rent control. They brought forward petitions on legalizing cannabis. I would just encourage people to not look at this through an ideological lens. If you've got an issue that is important to you, that you think can garner the support of your fellow citizens, get out there, start a petition campaign. Once this legislation is passed, you have 120 days. You'll be able to, based on the previous voter turnout, you'd be able to get 177,000 signatures, and you can put it to the people in the next scheduled referendum election.
You're saying it's not about ideology or separation, and yet I want to get your thoughts on a recent Facebook post from your party president on Tuesday, posting the video from your news conference on those election law changes. The party president wrote, "This announcement is giving you the pathway some of you are seeking today," with one commenting saying, "We want a path charting to independence or the 51st state, nothing else." To which the party president said, "Please read her announcement. It's in there."
The Citizens Initiative referenda legislation applies to all questions. We want to make fairness across the board. 10% of the previous voter turnout on any question. And again, I'm not going to prejudge what citizens are going to put forward for a question. From the moment, from what I can see, there are no active petitions. There are no questions out there being debated. And I look forward to seeing what comes forward when citizens take action and get to that bar. Remember, the purpose of a referendum is to let every single Albertan have a say on matters of important public policy. Every other decision we make is a delegated decision to a member of the Legislative Assembly. We don't necessarily, through the Legislative Assembly, deal with everything that's of interest to Albertans. So this is enabling direct democracy. I think we should embrace it.
Thank you. We'll go to Emmanuel. Lisa.
Emmanuel Percival, Radio-Canada. Do you support the efforts to hold a referendum on Alberta separating from Canada?
I support the process of citizens being able to choose an issue that they care about and then being able to get enough signatures to put it to the people. And I guess we'll have to wait and see what comes forward on that.
And what is your personal position on Alberta separating from
My
Canada?
personal position is I believe in Alberta sovereignty within a united Canada.
What does that mean?
It means like what we're doing today. When the federal government violates the Constitution, goes out of their way to interfere with our exclusive jurisdiction, we are going to meet them with every step that we can in order to preserve our ability to manage our own affairs. And in today's announcement, particularly for electricity, we are simply not going to allow the federal government, based on ideology, to violate the Constitution and put our people at risk of being in blackout during the dead of winter or the heat of summer. We're just not going to do it. So these are the kind of things that you can expect to see from our government, and we'll do more of them if we have to.
Perfect. We'll go to Lisa, and then Graham, and then we're going to go to the phones.
Hi, sorry, Premier. It kind of feels like you're being disingenuous here. You're not acknowledging what your party president said. You're not acknowledging that there are people gathering outside the legislature today calling for a separation referendum. You're not acknowledging that there are many groups of people in this province who read your proposed legislation as an open door, as an invitation to bring this referendum forward. I mean, do you acknowledge that this has opened the door for them to get it? This is fanning the flames of the fire.
Well,
do you acknowledge that?
I can read the media just as you can, and I can read the polls just as you can. And Angus Reid did a poll a couple of weeks ago that said that there was independence support of 25% of Albertans and higher, I think 33%. Of Saskatchewan residents. That seems to me that the majority of people are not in favor of that. And so I guess we'll see whether or not they're able to put together a petition, gather enough signatures, and put it to the people. I think you're kind of jumping ahead a few steps. We have initiative legislation that has been in the works from my minister since I wrote his mandate letter in 2023, when this was not an active conversation. This legislation came forward now because we have a whole pile of rules that we need to change, because we have to start preparing for a provincial election in 2027. So this is just part of the process. And we had heard from the public on both our recall legislation and our citizen initiative that the bars were set too high, and they wanted us to bring them down so that certain questions could be achieved through a petition campaign at a more reasonable level. We looked around the world. We looked at California, which I think is really the hallmark of this type of legislation, and we brought our amounts down to align with that.
And I need to ask about this lawsuit or referring this issue to the Court of Appeal. Can you just walk me through the timeline here, because I'm confused? In March, the Premier had a list of 9 demands to whomever becomes Prime Minister, and one of them was this issue, to address this issue. Mark Carney hasn't appointed a cabinet yet. We don't know who the Environment Minister is. We have not hit that 6-month Mark, you haven't, it seems like they haven't even had a chance to address this. So why are you bringing this forward now?
Well, most certainly. Let me take you back just a little bit. We know that the clean electricity regulations were introduced in 2024. We tried, and we tried to work with the federal government to try and provide our input time and again to see if we could help address some of our concerns. They were ignored. During the course of the election, as you already know, Prime Minister Carney doubled down repeatedly on his position as it relates to various things, including the clean energy regulations. We've seen no indication that it is going to change. It is our intention now to refer the matter to the Court of Appeal. Now, the process, as you asked about, is that we will refer it today to the Court of Appeal. We will work with the Court of Appeal on scheduling. Our internal counsel will be handling this matter, and we'll just move through the process like we always do.
Perfect. And we'll go to Graham, and then we're going to hit the phones next, and we'll try and come back here.
You talk about direct democracy. This has been interesting to mention California. It's come under a lot of criticism. You got a lot of these initiatives that confuse voters, and you're elected as a representative. That's what we normally do in Canada. Look at Brexit, for example. So you have a government doing one thing, elected to do something. You have initiatives, and Brexit's a clear example of how that tripped up the process, and people actually voted for something not really understanding what they were voting for. It's caused all kinds of problems. But you want to do direct democracy now in Alberta as opposed to representative democracy?
Well, I'm inheriting a system of and a history of direct democracy that we've had in this province. Prohibition, I think, was ended through direct democracy. We had votes on BLTs in communities in '98. We've had votes both for and against fluoride in Calgary. And the former premier had put forward a citizen initiative framework at the provincial level that we just discovered, and from feedback, was a little bit too strict. And so we've brought the rules in alignment with what we think is going to be achievable to allow for people to have a say. So I think direct democracy has a long history in Alberta, and we're just going to make sure that citizens are able to identify issues they care about so that they can vote on them directly.
And speaking of then direct democracy, when it comes to the pension plan, what's happening with that? And you mentioned the poll earlier. With a poll, I think it was a Leger poll in February, saying that 55% of Albertans do not want an Alberta pension plan. So that poll is showing a majority do not want it. What's actually happening with the pension plan initiative?
Well, I have said that I would put it to the people if I saw evidence they wanted to vote on it. I'm not seeing that at the moment. I think part of it is that we don't have all the answers that we were hoping for from the federal government about what the transfer would be. But again, that's another issue that could be put to citizen initiative. If I'm misreading the public on that, and they want to have an actual vote on it, then that's another issue that could be put forward by citizen initiative. But at the moment, I'm seeing, again, same results you are. I'm not seeing that there's an appetite to put it to the people at the moment.
Thank you. And we're going to go to the phones for a few questions now. Operator, could you put through our first caller, please?
Sheila Gunn-Reid with Rebel News.
Premier, canola is a $44 billion industry. It supports 206,000 jobs, 40,000 Western farmers. Yet Prime Minister Carney, during his campaign and even now, has said nothing about the 100% retaliatory Chinese tariffs on canola thanks to the Liberals' green protectionist EV policies. So what is your government doing to ensure the canola tariffs are treated with the same urgency by the feds as the auto and steel sector one?
Well, I can tell you that all of the Western premiers who have a large canola industry in their provinces, and that is regardless of political stripe, have raised it directly with the Prime Minister. It seems like it's a bit of a phony war. We've got a 100% tax on EV vehicles from China that no one's buying in order to protect an EV industry in Ontario that doesn't exist. And in return, we are seeing punishment on pork and canola in our Western provinces, which are products people do want. So I think the Chinese have been very targeted and direct in how they're trying to split our country up. And I think we need to revisit that. We obviously are going to have to find new markets for our products, but let's at least engage in proportionate responses rather than having a knee-jerk reaction that is only going to hurt our industries further. And that has been conveyed by myself as well as other premiers directly to the Prime Minister.
The Bloc leader, who will hold some power and influence over Carney's minority cabinet, has just said that there's no future for oil and gas in Quebec or anywhere for that matter. Carney has also said he would allow a Quebec veto over pipelines. So how does Alberta then respond if no pipelines east is the deal that helps Carney keep his government from falling?
Well, I would hope that's not the case. The Canadian people did not vote for fringe voices like the Bloc Québécois or fringe voices like the Green Party or fringe voices like the NDP to control the agenda for the next while here. What Albertans and Canadians voted for was for Canada to become an economic superpower. And that means also an energy superpower. And that is what I would fully expect Mark Carney to do. I hope that he's able to continue forward with an agenda that perhaps even the Conservative opposition would support him in. That's what I think the message of the election is. And I would surely hope that he's not listening to fringe voices from a party that is solely committed to breaking this country up.
Thank you. We'll go on to our next question. Operator, could you put through the next caller, please?
Jamie Sarkonak with National Post.
Hi there. I'm just wondering what parts of the final regulations fell short in terms of, in your view? Because in the first draft regulations that were put out, Alberta responded. There were issues with cogeneration units. There were issues with how emergencies would be dealt with. The feds, in their final version, they say they updated the regulations to account for those criticisms. But obviously this isn't meeting what you guys are asking for. So I'm just wondering specifically, what did the feds try to give you and how did it fall short?
Well, it's not what they're trying to give us. I look at the outcome. I look at what are the projects that are being put forward to the electric system operator and the Alberta Utilities Commission for approval. And we have 0 large-scale natural gas plants being proposed. That tells me something about the level of uncertainty that natural gas plants have. Because remember, this is written as criminal violation, if you do not meet the target by 2035. So what CEO is going to, by 2035, building with today's technology, be able to guarantee a 95% abatement on their CO2 within 10 years with technology that doesn't exist, on risk of going to jail? And I'm going to tell you there are 0. And so that is the nature of the problem that we have. When natural gas plants get built on today's technology, they have about a 25-year time horizon in order that they don't have stranded assets. And so that's why we have asked the federal government to align around emissions reduction policy that's reasonable around 2050. That's what the rest of the world is committing to. China's committing to 2060. India's committing to 2070. China and India are both bringing on coal plants at a rate that far exceeds anything that we produce in Canada. And so why would we punish our industry? Why would we risk blackouts? Why would we risk grid instability for an unachievable target? Why not work with us to try to find best available technology without these punitive measures? And I can turn it over to my Minister of Affordability Utilities, and he can tell you about the chill that is putting on investment directly.
Yeah, Premier, you did a great job with that. Again, it's achievable targets. 95% for carbon capture is just not going to happen. And the technology cost today is in the billions. So when their investment tax credit only covers half of that, which company is going to abandon $1 billion to do something that's not giving any return on investment? It's not realistic, it's not achievable, and it doesn't help us get anywhere. We're making practical, reasonable steps by allowing, in legislation, hydrogen blending, allowing Albertans to choose. We're finding responsible, reasonable pathways. We just need time. And I think the Premier summed it up very well.
And a follow-up, Jamie?
How would you describe how the feds took into account your feedback? Was it a matter of they chipped away at the edges of what you were talking about and didn't touch any of the substantive stuff? Or happy to hear your thoughts.
Well, they don't respect the Constitution. Section 92 of the Constitution not only enumerates our exclusive jurisdiction, that's the word in the Constitution, exclusive jurisdiction over resource development and the development of electricity. And there's a reason for that. It's because every province has different endowments and different abilities to generate electricity. That is why it has been assigned to the provinces to make these decisions. I wonder how Mark Carney would feel if I started regulating in an area of federal jurisdiction. And you asked him, oh, well, as long as it's, modifying around the edges, are you okay with them developing their own currency or developing their own approach to weights and measures or establishing military installations? The answer would be no, it's not my jurisdiction. And that is foundationally the problem. This is not their jurisdiction. So it doesn't matter what kind of modifications they're going to say, it violates the Constitution. And we're going to argue that vigorously in court.
Thanks, Jamie. We have time for a couple more questions. We're going to take one more from the phones, and then I know, James, do you still have your hand up back there? Perfect. Yeah, go ahead, operator. Could you put through our next caller?
Rick Bell, Post Media.
Good morning, Premier. Riddle me this one. How confident are you that the new Prime Minister will listen to you, given the following facts? One, he is still in favor of the emissions cap. Two, he said he's not going to repeal Bill C-69. Three, when he was asked in Calgary by yours truly to make a commitment that his energy corridor would include pipelines, oil and gas pipelines, and LNG, and he would not commit. At that same news conference, he dismissed your 9 demands in a single sentence, saying he had his own plans, and he still has many of the Trudeau team people who have, let's just say, disappointed Alberta in the past with their views, including your close and personal friend, Stephen Guilbeault. So how confident are you, given all of those facts that we know so far?
It depends very much on whether we have pragmatic Bank of Canada Governor Mark Carney as our Prime Minister, or whether we have environmental extremist, keep it in the ground, phase out fossil fuels, author of the book Values, Mark Carney as Prime Minister. And I don't know the answer to that yet. I don't think Canadians know the answer to that yet, because as I continue to point out, he said different things to different people in different parts of the province or country in different languages. So we won't really know until we see the decisions he's making for cabinet. We won't really know until I've had an opportunity to speak with him, which I will be this week. And so we'll do a readout of that conversation, and I'll be able to tell you then.
And the supplementary question, I kind of find it funny that a few weeks ago, everybody thought even the possibility of somebody getting enough signatures for a referendum on Alberta independence was just the work of a few yahoos, and now obviously people are very serious about it now. That being said, since the election, and you saw the returns as much as I did, and the overwhelming Conservative vote, what have you heard, and what have your MLAs heard about the mood out there in Alberta with regards to the election of the Carney Liberal government? What are they hearing? What feedback are you hearing? What feedback are they hearing from people, especially on this Alberta file?
I think it's split. There's lots of people sending me texts and emails saying, give it a chance, do what you can, put forward your policies, see if the different leadership makes a difference, see if we can mend the country together, see if we can find a way to have them change course on some of the bad policies of his predecessor, and let's try to make it work. Let's try to make Canada aspirationally what people wanted. People during this election wanted a Team Canada and a Canada First approach that supported every region, supported every province in its aspirations. So give that a chance. That's one side. And the other side is we're fed up that we have been targeted for the last 10 years with aggressive policy to keep our energy resources, our substantial energy resources in the ground. The reason we send so much of our product to the United States is that it's easier to build pipelines going south than it is east, west, and north. And it shouldn't be that way. And we're fed up. So I'm hearing both camps. And so we'll be having a caucus meeting tomorrow where I'm going to be able to hear directly from each of my MLAs to see if they're hearing the same things I am. But I think my job is to try to do what I can. I put on the table the 9 issues that I think will reset the relationship with Alberta. I will be talking with the Prime Minister and making our case very, very clearly about what it is that we think we need to do to reset and be that energy powerhouse. And I'll gauge the result based on his actions. And we'll know pretty quickly whether or not he's going to make some movement on those things.
Thank you. And we'll go to James now in the back.
Thanks. Premier, I'm just wondering do you have a breaking point where you would then consider independence?
I would always allow for citizens to to put forward their own ideas about what they think our path forward should be. I've put forward my ideas of what I think the path forward should be. It's the Alberta Sovereignty within a United Canada Act. It's affirming our Constitution. It is doing the kind of advocacy that we have, doing the legal challenges that we have, and engaging in diplomacy and trying to figure out if we can find a pathway. I did that in my very first conversation with Mark Carney's predecessor, and I will do the same thing with him. That's my job to do. And I'll over the summer, I'll be intending to, I mentioned this as well, that I'll be intending to do a what's next conversation and panel, travel the province, hear from people, see if there's other things that I'm not thinking of that they'd like us to do. But at the moment, I'm focused on those 9 issues that I raised and seeing if we can get some kind of repeal or accommodation to make sure that we really can start attracting investment to our province again.
Yeah,
Premier, there are dozens, if not hundreds, of coal-fired power stations being built around the world right now. Given that, why is Ottawa so fixated on making Canadians pay, particularly for items like carbon capture and storage, which have almost no effect at all on global emissions?
Well, I think there's been a movement in the last year, maybe longer, probably longer, with the Russian invasion of Ukraine, the instability in natural gas prices. There's been also a court decision out of The Hague with involving Shell, where they determined that if Shell was not producing natural gas, it would just mean that more coal was being produced, which would mean that it would increase emissions. And so it was pretty clear that the recognition that natural gas is a way to reduce global emissions. We've already shown leadership on that. We phased, albeit probably too early and at too great an expense, phased out coal in Alberta in favor of natural gas, which resulted in a 53% reduction in emissions. So we've seen that. We've made major progress with our Environment Minister as well on reducing methane emissions by 45%, and there's more work to do there, and I think we can. The rest of the world, and I think there's an opportunity at G7 taking place in Kananaskis in June, and I would hope the world leaders adopt a resolution that nuclear and natural gas are both clean energy options because the alternatives are just so much more damaging. So that's one part of it, and that's what I've been advocating for, and I think that there are other world leaders who are looking at doing the same. I can tell you Japan and Korea are very, very keen to get more natural gas liquids as well as more liquefied natural gas from us so that they can continue to reduce their emissions profile so that they don't have to look at coal as an option. And I think all the Asian countries are in a similar boat. So I think we have a bit of a change of heart coming. And it doesn't necessarily mean that we have to go back to doing coal-fired electricity, although I note with interest that my neighbor in Saskatchewan has decided to do exactly that because they hadn't phased out their coal plants themselves. But the other part I think we cannot underestimate is why China is bringing on coal-fired electricity. They're building coal plants on spec in anticipation they will need that power to fuel the AI data race. And I think we have to be very clear about what happens if China wins the race to manufacture intelligence. That is what AI is. We cannot allow China to win that race. That has to be a race that we win in the free countries of the world, in North America in particular. And we have the ability to do that, along with our friends in Quebec, who have been at the absolute lead in developing data centers, and many of their companies are looking at investing here. And part of the reason they're looking at investing here is because of our value proposition, to have the ability to produce natural gas-fired electricity with low emissions. And that is exactly why we need to have the freedom, as we are going to argue in the court, to be able to have control over our natural gas, have control over our electricity grid, and be able to work with those nations who want to invest in this AI data race to be able to make sure that we win that race.
And that's all the time we have for questions today. Thank you, everybody, for joining us.
All right.
Thank
I
you.
always meet with, sure, I always meet with the chiefs. Yep, we have a very good relationship with them. Well, I'll look at my schedule, but I'd be happy to. We often have protocol meetings.